Hello, Patriot. It is I, your socialismaphobic individual representative. I don't know. Is that a thing? It could be a thing. I mean, I guess there's Islamophobia, which is the irrational fear of Islam. So I guess that would make me, since I have, well, I guess my fear is not irrational. My fear is definitely based on actual reality and events that happen. This is why I fear socialism, and I'm against it, and I keep making videos about it, and I do have an obsession. I think that's my problem in life. I do have an obsession with socialism and making sure that as many people as possible know that it is definitely a failure and we cannot try it in Canada. So that's where I live, in Canada, and unfortunately I do see a lot of Soviet parallels or socialist parallels that are happening in my country, and freaks me out a little bit. And then I make a video about it to show the rest of you that what I see, and you can tell me if you agree or not. But I did have a comment on a previous video I made, and it said, why do you think Canada is socialist? It's not socialist. But anyways, so here goes. Today I'm going to say one example of why how Canada is actually following the exact same tactic that the USSR followed. And I'm going to pick on the Ukrainian example from history, which is one of the most horrific. I mean, there's no horror movies that have been made, and I said horror. My husband says when I say horror, it sounds like whore. So not a horror movie, a horror movie. Anyways, there you go. Nailed it. So there's no horror movie out there that has been as awful, even all of them put together, as what happened to the Ukrainian peasants in the 1930s. So Ukrainians have not had a good time from 1917 all the way to 1991. This is not good for them, but they had especially rough patches in the 30s, and just absolutely horrific things that have happened to them. Now, these things were launched on them. The mass famine, the mass murders were launched on them by their own government. So the communist government of Ukraine, but also the central Communist Party in the USSR. So central command, essentially. Both of them really attacked the population, and when the population resisted, at first they resisted just the local, then they started resisting the whole USSR thing. Lots of measures were decreed against the Ukrainians, and I see a similarity between what happened there, although the main crisis, which is famine in Ukraine, is not the crisis in Canada, but there are some similarities. So let me tell you what Stalin did first to the Ukrainians, and then I'll tell you what the government of Canada is doing that is very similar in nature, and you can let me know if you think that my assessment is good, or if I should crawl back into the hole I came from. So what Stalin did to the Ukraine in the 30s was absolutely horrific. In the 30s, Stalin had already had quite a few measures against the peasants in place, and the peasants working the fields, and the Ukraine. For anybody who doesn't know the Ukraine, it was considered to be the bread basket of Europe. The soil was so fertile that they would use Ukrainian soil as fertilizer for other soils. That's how great they had it. And they were able to produce a lot of grain and rye and things, and they would export it a lot. So, but they kept some and they exported. They were known for that. And until the communist regime settled in and slowly took away land. So what it did is it took away the land from all the people who were doing well, and it launched an attack on the people who were doing well, saying that they were enemies of the state and that they should be eliminated. So they started sending all of these rich peasants, so the peasants who were doing well, and they called them kulaks, so K-U-L-A-K-S for plural, and any of those guys who were doing well were sent to the gulag. Now, there is no true measure of what it means to do well or what it is to be rich. So that was left to the lower level Communist Party teams to determine how you were doing. So they would go to a village, and assuming most people in the village had 1 cow, 1 pig, and then you had the guy at the end of the street that had 3 cows, 2 pigs, he was considered a kulak. it was pretty much like open for interpretation. And that's what was scary, is it was, they had edicts, they had measures, they had motions, they had laws that were put in place that were very nebulous in nature, very hard to determine how to apply it, because it wasn't defined properly. And this is precisely what Canada is doing. Canada is in the middle right now of issuing laws, motions, bills that are very, very tough to understand, so that it makes them open for interpretation at the end of the day. And even lawyers are struggling because they won't necessarily always know. And it's even worse for people, so normal citizens like me, because I don't even understand anymore at this point what it is I'm allowed to say. I honestly, the hate speech laws are coming, and how do you have a law that is based on an opinion and or a feeling? So hate is a feeling, and now we're going to be judged on a feeling in the context or the framework of our legal system. And this is exactly how Stalin started manipulating things. And by making it so that you don't know where you stand, you could literally be breaking the law at any point. And this is what happened to the peasants in Ukraine. Any dissident voice, any dissent, any person who would stand up and speak out against what the loss of their private lands or anything, would either be shot or sent to the gulag, which they would eventually die in the gulag system, or get shot in the gulag system. Very few survived. It was pretty horrific. In Canada, we don't have a gulag system yet. We have to wake up so that we understand what is happening, and we make sure our government is never in a position that they can actually impose that. We need to start fighting right off the bat as soon as we start realizing what's happening. So some of the measures the Canadian government has taken against the Canadian people now is C-16, which is the compelled speech law. There have been some lawyers have come out and explained how this is very detrimental, because now for a perceived offense to a transgendered individual, so all the transgendered individual needs to say is, I think this person hates me because he refuses to call me by my designated pronoun. Take that person to a human rights tribunal in Ontario, or even a federal court. And the federal court now has been asked to issue a sentence for that specific. So if initially it wouldn't be a sentence, they would probably get a warning or a cease and desist or something like that. But then it would be, if you don't pay your fine, you could end up in jail. So you could legitimately end up in jail. But worse is that this law C-16 is really open to interpretation. So it allows one group of the population to interpret how they feel and then pursue an action in a legal system based on that feeling. So the government is overreaching with this bill. It's the same with M103. M103 is the anti-Islamophobia motion. Now, Islam, the religion, Jewish, Christianity, Hindus, any religion is already protected in Canada through our freedom of religion act that we have here. So there is no need to single out a specific other religion to do that. That one scares me a little bit more. Actually, they all scare me, but that one is a hybrid between a USSR Soviet strategy and a Sharia strategy. So Sharia is Islamic law, and anyways, I'll do another video on Islamic law because I think that one should have its own video, and I don't want to make this video 20 minutes long. But as far as the Islamophobia M103 law motion, it wasn't. It's meant to quell the criticism of Islam. So that means it opens up the interpretation for any Muslim to say that somebody criticized Islam, even if it's done in an intellectual way. Even if I were to come out and say Islam allows wife beating, if a Muslim says to me, nope, that's Islamophobic, you're anti-Muslim, they could drag me up to a court and I could face a tribunal and then get some kind of sentence pushed down on me simply for stating a true fact about Islam. this is what M103 is managing to do. It wants to make sure that nobody talks about Islam so that the Islamic law, which is the Sharia, can advance unimposed and without anybody from our country messing with it. So it's a very scary law. But there's a whole bunch of laws coming out like that. There's the law about the gun control, which is trying to make it even harder for vendors to actually to sell guns, because now they have a whole bunch of admin work to do around tracking it and reporting it back to the government, and it just makes it painful, so that a lot of gun vendors are just going to say, small gun owners shops are just going to say, screw this, we're just going to sell fishing gear now, right? So that kind of thing is what's happening in Canada. So there's a whole bunch of them all over the place, and this is precisely what they did in the USSR. So while Stalin was starving the people of Ukraine via grain confiscation, so what they did is they said, we're going to take all the grain that you guys are growing and we're going to export it. Right after that, he started saying, we're not, to the local newspapers and local media, we're not going to say anywhere that we're exporting the grain so we don't cause panic with the peasants. But also they refused to let international aid workers come to the Ukraine to help solve this famine, because they didn't want those people to see the famine. And if local Ukrainian doctors or like Ukrainian party members would actually say, you know what, there's a full out famine, here's my card back, I don't want to be a communist party member anymore. This is what Stalin went after, all the lower ranking Communist Party officials, and he executed all of them, because when the famine was obvious, it couldn't be blamed on Stalin, so they blamed the lower levels. So this could very well happen in Canada, not via the famine route, but more via the legal route and the freedom of expression route, where anybody who doesn't completely go along with what the government says will be punished severely in some form or another. And these motions are being introduced one by one, and each one in itself is scary, but when you look at the global picture and the Canadian picture of what's happening, you start to see how this is going down the same route as the USSR. So first create a crisis or manufacture a crisis, and then this will allow the government to step in more and more and more and take more control and slowly regulate every single part of our life until we have no say anymore and we are just droids working for the state. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will keep working on some more stuff with my my socialism obsession and bring you more content. So have a great day.